Hi everyone. On behalf of the Office of Interdisciplinary Studies, IDS, I'd like to welcome you all to today's in-person masterclass. We already know that these masterclasses are a very vital component of our MSc Development Practice program, where we invite scholars, faculty, researchers from all across the world to share their insights on different aspects of development. And by doing so, we try to sort of bring together the components of theory and practice, which is the main goal of the program. We have had one in-person and one online masterclass so far. We initially had Professor Mihir Shah, who runs a program on rural management in Shivnadar. And we also had Dr. Manik Nath, who specializes in economic history and is a faculty at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. Today we are really delighted to be hosting Dr. Partha Mukhopadhyay, whose Sir does not require any introduction. We all already know a lot about him. Sir is and has been a senior fellow at Center for Policy Research, CPR, New Delhi. He joined CPR in 2006. He was previously part of the founding team at the Infrastructure Development Finance Company, focusing on private participation in infrastructure. In previous positions, he has been with the Export-Import Bank of India and with the World Bank in Washington. He has been on the faculty at IIM Ahmedabad, Xavier Labour Relations Institute, Jamshedpur, and the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi. Sir writes extensively about urbanization and other areas as well. Today's discussion, it's more of a roundtable discussion, and Sir will keep it more interactive so that students also get to get a chance to engage better. It's titled, "What is the Role of Theory in Development Practice?" I can just read out the basic abstract that was shared by Sir. Development practices often thought of as a set of effective practices that have worked on the ground to achieve a defined set of outcomes, nowadays often linked to SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Theories, on the other hand, are situated in disciplines, and frameworks from one discipline do not translate to others easily. So how does theory engage with development practice, which is inherently interdisciplinary in nature? This will be an interactive discussion session that will engage with this question. Participants, students are encouraged to bring their questions and perspectives to the table. With this, I'd like to hand over the mic, so to say, to Dr. Partha. And thank you, sir, for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Parth. Okay, so introductions. I have four names. So you, I know, Pranav, right? Okay.
My name is Gurpreet.
Spell that.
STUT.
Our CV was not shared, so can you talk a little bit about everyone's?
And I know Pranav is a lawyer. You are.
I've been a psychology student and I'm really interested towards the area of mental health. So policy is also.
Psychology in where do you study?
Zimbabwe.
Both, right? Okay. So psychology and policy.
Currently, I'm just working with angels and working towards career.
With children, with adults.
With children.
Very nice. Okay.
I'm Khushi,
Mhm.
and I completed my undergrad in Christ
Yes.
in psychology, sociology, and English. And
But you're not as enthused about psychology as she is.
yeah. Though I'm still in two minds of doing psychology masters next year, but I'm still undecided.
Hello sir, I'm Paki, a third year student at LSR, and I'm currently pursuing political science honors with a minor in economics.
You take a minor in economics. Okay, very nice. LSR is, of course, our chair is the former principal of LSR, so that is an area where we sort of put something, a lot of stuff together. Okay. Right.
Hi, sir. My name is Shubhangi, and I've been a development practitioner for about 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily in livelihoods, in the domain of livelihoods. And yeah, I mean, after working for a while, I thought of diving into my master's
make sense of your last 7 years?
I mean, my last project was, it exposed me to a little bit of research, and it was something new to me, and I learned quite a lot on the job. But it also, I mean, I got interested in like studying, research, and I anyway, like, I love being a student, and I love being a learner. So I wanted to be back to a classroom.
Even when the classrooms don't have green. Very well.
Hello sir, my name is Sanika Gulati and I have done my BA from Ambedkar University in BA Global Studies.
Thank you. So in today's talk, and I'll sort of go through it very quickly and then interrupt me whenever you want. I'll take up 3 things. The first is something that you're familiar with, which is buses. 3 examples of how we the first 2 sort of are examples of how you use theory to design contracts. And the third is more this variety across disciplines as to how you look at the same issue, but you look at it from different perspectives depending on where you're coming from. So that's the broad thrust of this. And hopefully it will be quick or longer going forward, it's coming through. So how do you think, so the old days what used to happen was buses were bought by the government. There was a bus conductor and a bus driver were employed by the government. And of course there were a bunch of mechanics in the depots which were structured into place. And buses used to run on the roads, and that was the standard structure. The fully government enterprise. The assets, in this case the bus depots and the buses, were owned by the government. The people who were running it, the drivers, the conductors, and the repair people were all sort of government employees or government undertaking employees. Usually these bus companies, so Calcutta State Transport Company, DESD, Bombay Electricity Transport, DTC, of course, Delhi Transport Corporation. So the issue of contracts comes in when you're thinking of moving away from that model to another model where, in this case, it would be a contracting party, contracting with somebody to provide buses and bus services. So 2 quick things that sort of come through is I'm going to be discussing something that's called gross cost contracts. So usually, how many of you are familiar with something that used to be called the KM scheme? Kilometer scheme. Well before your time. How do you hire a car?
Earlier it was, there used to be a surcharge after every kilometer, and there used to be a fixed charge.
Usually nowadays you use Uber and so on and so forth, but let's say you hire if you ever hire a taxi for the day to go somewhere or something, how do you pay? Through a meter.
No,
Yeah.
kilometers, that is like per certain kilometer, per kilometer charge.
Per kilometer. Okay. So once upon a time, buses used to run on the same way. So when, instead of buying the bus and running it, the government used to hire a bus from somebody. Sometimes the staff would be government employees, sometimes the bus would therefore be paid per kilometer. So you get a per kilometer charge for however long the bus runs. That's way. And sometimes you end up doing something that is not on a per kilometer basis, but the bus guy is allowed to run a particular route, and whatever money he makes from the fares they collect is up to the bus. So different models in which once you are moving away from providing the service yourself, you'll have to think about what is the basis on which you contract with someone. There are different ways of paying somebody for a service. So let's try and figure out what is a good way of doing it. So what I'll talk about today is, you guys have all seen these buses on the road? The orange buses. They are not TTC buses. They are all Delhi transit buses.
These are the orange buses, not the red ones. I mean,
The red buses are, I think, AC buses. Then there are the green buses. Now there are blue buses. And there are orange buses. Okay. The orange buses, I'll tell you the story of the orange buses. And then last, the same gross, the orange buses, the first time something called a gross cost contract was put in this country. And eventually, many years later, this was adopted by the PM E-Bus Seva, which is now being rolled out across the country to provide electric buses for local cities. So in terms of development practice, as you can see, it is not as if this particular gross cost contract and this particular model was not used by any other city until they started the PM bus Seva. So for 15 years, nothing of that sort. So you can read it on screen, you can put it to my figure. So as I said, 9th July, a young boy was killed in a road accident. And for some reason, the judges of Delhi High Court were very upset about it. And they ended up taking a case that's called
PIL. Cognizance by the court.
Yes. What is that? You may as well explain to your colleagues.
When the court takes up a matter into its cognizance without any PIL or writ petition,
Right.
which is when somebody puts up the case in front of the judges or the bench.
Right. So this case comes in, and initially, if you look at that stuff, it looks as if judges don't do that often, don't take up cases so moto. And so the government was a little concerned, but not very concerned, right? Until they weren't sure as to what the judges were going to do about it. I happened to write an op-ed soon after, within a couple of weeks of that, basically talking about, because the conversation around that time was largely better monitoring, better policing, better this, better that, etc. And the point I was making was essentially that part of the problem was the way.
Make sure that you don't touch the screen.
Yes, don't touch this screen also.
Yes.
Perfect, sorry.
This is untouchable.
Yes.
Screen is untouchable.
So you have as you can see, the contractual relationship with the bus owner was what I was focusing on. And why was that the issue? Because in this case, it wasn't the KM scheme, it was basically the retained the amount. So every bus was trying to pick up passengers. And therefore, they were racing ahead and they're driving rashly, then they're likely to cause more. That was the broad thrust of that. What happened after that was the bureaucrat who was entrusted with then responding to the court, because the court got serious, the government had to put up something. The court said, tell us what you're going to do. And the bureaucrat who was then in charge, then we had worked together earlier when the National Highway Program was coming together. He was then in the Vajpayee's PMO, I was with this IDFC firm, we were the secretariat to the Prime Minister's Task Force Infrastructure. asked to be the note taker for these meetings, write out minutes, talk to people. So we had worked together. And he called in and said, writing all this stuff, or just writing stuff, you want to fix it. And that led to that report that you see. So July, this happens. Over the next 3 months, August, September, October, we intensively work with the Delhi government and this new firm which was set up called DIMTS, which was then a joint venture of my previous firm, had since left IDFC and joined CPR. So the previous firm, DIMTS, was a joint venture of the government of Delhi and IDFC. And we put together this report suggesting a particular framework. And as you can see, this is the that same report which we gave on the 30th of October was then submitted, put forward to the cabinet on the 31st of the next day. In fact, very quick. The scheme was approved by the government, and therefore it was presented to court, saying this is what we want to do. So that's a sequence of action. This is the incident. There's an op-ed which sort of brings someone to light. That is the actual work that happens. And this is the, in some sense, the outcome. This is the theory, that's the practice. And what was the theory? Why is it called the cluster bus scheme? It's called the cluster bus scheme because what we did was, what was our original worry? That these buses were running and trying to pick up passengers. How do we stop that? We did 2 things. One, we took away the incentive for collecting fares. So buses were now going to be paid based roughly on something like the kilometer scheme, but it had bells and whistles. By then you had the ability to ensure that it stopped at a stop, it wasn't running ahead. A lot of times when you try to board a bus even today, it will not stop at the stop, it will stop a few yards before or after. You were running across the bus. All of that is generally increases the amount of danger that passengers are in, right? So we were checking to see whether the bus was stopping, whether it was maintaining a schedule, all of that. It's supposed to work. There was a bus operation center set up and so on. The second thing that we did was we grouped routes. It was too little time to actually restructure routes in Delhi. I think it's seriously needed even today. That's about 18 years later. But we grouped routes. So all the buses which go in one direction, if they have been mapped out all the routes, we said any route that had a 10-kilometer overlap or more was put into one together. So there are groups of routes that are created from the total number of 600 odd routes that then we had it all that. So routes were clustered, and that's how the clustering worked. Each cluster of routes was then awarded to one firm and DTC. So DTC was running on all the routes, and one other private firm, but a single firm for the set of routes was selected. So since the routes were all in the same direction, all the passengers were being put up, was picking up by, regardless of which bus was running, they were all traveling by a bus of that particular company. So this incentive to pick up people for, and for a race ahead, first we were not making any money because we had taken away the revenue. But just in case that wasn't enough, we also ended up doing that. So the thrust of it was identifying this relationship and then coming up with a structure that addressed that incentive problem. So whenever you're looking at structure, you're always looking, that comes from my discipline, is one is looking at incentives. Why am I doing it? It's also the truth for psychology. So why is somebody doing it? Right? Stuff of child psychology is always about how do you get a young person to behave in the manner you want that person to behave. If you just tell them, don't do it, quite likely they will just go ahead and do that stuff anyway. How do you align those incentives? And it's true as much for firms and bureaucrats as it is for young kids. That is what we ended up doing in this particular instance. Let me now quickly move, but before that, questions, structures, we can all come back and talk more about it, but anything that you want to talk about? Part of the reasons I've given you those handouts is that you can make notes on the handouts in case you have questions, structures, things that you can move through, if you get through anything that you're reading that you don't feel makes sense, you're not sure why it is there. So as you can see, these are, each of them has a reference. Both those two are from the final order in the case, which was given way back in 2011. The actual order, even though, and the contracts eventually got awarded, as you saw in 2011. So this is from the final judgment of that particular case. Okay, so the next thing we looked at was something that we call, how did PM just inaugurated some urban expressway, something, etc. We've built a lot of highways in this country. How many of you, none of you drove a car when the first highway was very bad. So at that time, there were no 4-lane highways. So one fine day, Mr. Vajpayee in 1998 basically went ahead and made a speech where he says we're going to have highways from Kashmir to Kanyakumari and Saurashtra to Sri. Typical political speech. I was traveling somewhere. I remember, distinctly remember laughing about it with some friends. And then a few days later, I came back to Delhi, and my then boss, and got to become the governor of the Reserve Bank, he was consulting with the Ministry of Finance. He called me and said, "Can you come in?" And I said, "I'm tired. I'm really coming in this time. I've been on the road for about 3 days." I said, "No, it's important." So we planned up, and what they should we heard about the speech. I said, "Yes, we heard about the speech." And then we were asked to come here on yes. We have the government setting up a task force. Okay. We need task force to disturb the government. And we are writing it. And it's got to be written in the next 2 hours, because the meeting is 1 o'clock right now. 3 o'clock we're meeting with the bank. That time was. And that was what led to the Prime Minister's task force. That's why we're part of the secretariat. But fundamentally, when you're looking at, that was the beginning, at that point in time, there were the only 4-lane highway was the one between Mumbai and there was nothing else. Now, of course, you have a lot more. So, if you want to figure out how to award a road contract, the original idea was, it's like you do a building contract. Somebody comes in, say X amount of road has to be built, and it might require X bags of cement, Y bags of stone, so much iron, so much this, and it's called, the whole thing is called a bill of quantities, BOQ. There's a rate given for each item in the bill of quantities. The people essentially bid for a particular amount in that rate. So every bill, it says cement, and the person who's bidding has to put out a number which says 200 per bag of cement. And whoever you add up that into the expected number of quantities, whoever gets the expected lowest cost is given the tender. That's how it used to work. It's a nice way of, shall we say, gaming that system. We'll talk about that later. But broadly speaking, the first is the cost of actually, the four costs and something else, and I'll come through, and these are the four characteristics of contract. So the first one is, if I am any road, which I've done it that way, it means that the maintenance of the road is separate from the construction. Because somebody builds it, just like, some guy builds a house that you live in, but that person is not maintaining the house. 5, 10 years, your roof starts to leak, you've got to get it fixed. You can't go back to the contractor and say fix it. So the first thing is the maintenance integrated or separated? Somebody else will. In a road, at that time we also were paying tolls. So the collection of toll, is that the same guy who built the road who's collecting the toll, or different guys? Is the traffic risk that we call it, the tolls essentially mean the number of cars go through, that is the kind of money that you make on that particular story. Is that something that you're able to do? Is that integrated into the contract or separated? And then, as a result of which, there is something, as you'll see, there's a total revenue, there are different models. You can either, just like with the bus contracts, which meant that you could actually quickly, for every kilometer that you do, you get something, or every passenger that you pick up, you get something. A toll contract is like a passenger sale. But does the person who is running a toll road, does that person have any control on the number of cars which is going through those toll gates? So if you run a restaurant, you run any kind of decent structure, if you do better service, presumably you'll have more people coming to your restaurant. You're trying to sell a shirt, better colors, more style. You're competing with other shirt sellers. And therefore, you presume you have some control over something that you can do, which can attract more people. Trying to sell a car, the design of the car, the maintenance that you offer for the car, the mileage you offer for the car, all of that stuff you can change to attract more customers. What can you do to attract customers to a road? Is the quality of the road? There will be some. It's a lovely road, maybe every afternoon there'll be a bunch of young people who said, let's go out and take a drive just for the heck of driving on this very nice road. But usually a road use, and a lot of it is cargo use, means it is because goods have to be transported from somewhere to somewhere. And most of that is dependent on the overall economic situation of the country. And so not too much control over what is actually moving. So that's one of the issues, to whether we want to transfer some of the risks. So, what you have is different types of transactions cost. The transaction cost is anytime you want to award a road, there's a whole process of doing a bidding, structures, etc. That's one cost, right? The first one is contract negotiation. Awarding the contract. Then, somewhere in the middle, just like your contractor was building a house, the fellow might say, I said I was going to do it for 15 lakhs, but this has become too expensive, it needs more work, so we need to pay you more. So that becomes a renegotiation. Then you may not arrive at a, you might say, okay, we're done with you, then the contractor goes to court or some such place and says, you guys didn't pay me what you're supposed to pay. That is a dispute resolution. These are all costs that you have to get. Similarly, is the guy doing it right? Is the guy putting in as much cement as he was supposed to? Is the person putting in as much gravel as they're supposed to? Is he putting in half-inch chips or quarter-inch chips? All of that has to be monitored. So there is a monitoring cost. Right? Then there are agency costs where I said there is this whole thing about bidding. Sometimes what happens is either by design or because there is a lack of experience. Let's say the government has underestimated how much of cement it would need, and let's say overestimated how much stone chips it need. So the bidder who actually is building this stuff, that person knows how much will actually be required because he has experience in structure building. So what he will do is he will quote a low price, maybe even a loss-making price on the chips, and a high price on the cement. But because the quantity of cement is small and the quantity of chips is high, that number that comes out is small. It's smaller than it would have been. So he gets the contract. When it's actually implemented, you are paid as per actuals. So when you get paid, he's bid a high price for the cement, a nice big margin. He's making a lot more money because the road is actually using a lot more. So that if it's possible that the contractor would have paid the engineer to actually put out false estimates so that they could actually make more money. So all of that stuff comes under gaming. So you have to worry about that part of the story, right? If you're putting out a standard BOQ story. And then once you have built the road, you suddenly you built a 4-lane road, but you need to now have a 6-lane road because it's already congested. What do you do? You've given out a 10-year contract. How do you throw this guy out and say, no, I'm going to build a 6-lane road, therefore you need to go. So that becomes adding capacity. You want to change your tolling from the current tolling system that you currently have, which may be cash collection, to something that uses FASTag, to something that uses satellite. How are you going to do that? So these are all what we call foregone options. What you want to do is to minimize these costs. That's the structure of the contract. Right? And what you want to do is over here, as you can see, you want a situation where whoever is doing the stuff also picks up the responsibility for maintenance, collects the toll, right? And here you have to decide whether you want it to depend on the number of vehicles or you want it to not depend on the number of vehicles. So that's, you can decide on the characteristic of the thing. So these are the two broad things that you have to figure out when you're doing how do you minimize this and what kind of characteristics you want. And this is what we basically, one of the big tensions in all kinds of road contracts is, do you transfer the traffic risk to the road guy, the guy who is running the road, or do you not? More cars, does he make more money? Because remember, we have to go back and check if you end up in a situation where actually it starts making a lot more money, traffic has grown very fast. What do you want to do? You want to expand the road. But this fellow doesn't want to give it up because this fellow was making a lot of money now. So when you are giving these kinds of structures, you automatically lock yourself in. You have to now pay a cost to get that contract. That's a foregone option. So that's how we end up with structures. And what we are, in this case, the argument that we made is that you want to integrate maintenance, you want to separate out the tolling with somebody else, you want to separate out the traffic, but you want to retain the revenue. You don't want to give out roads. If a politician is kickbacks, there is money you make on giving out contracts. Possible. If there was no constraint, you could build a road from nowhere to nowhere because you can make money from that particular road contract. It's of no use to anyone. In many cases, when you look at slum rehabilitation projects, etc., you will see buildings are built because it's a costly contract. But nobody lives in them because the buildings are built in places where it's impossible for somebody to live and have a livelihood. But the person who built the building doesn't care because it's not, that person's not job to ensure that somebody is living in that building. In the same way, if you took away the project revenue completely, then you end up in a situation where it didn't matter whether the road was being used or not. So that's what the structure was, and if you can go through that structure in place, you'll end up saying these structures, and the legend is, as you can see, how each of these are different types of contracts. The first thing I want you to take away is that there are lots of types of contracts. Right? And depending on each of these places has a particular characteristic. What characteristic do you want? So something called the least present value of revenue, I'll come to that at the end. So the first thing you're asking yourself is, we said we want maintenance integrated and toll separated. So what is it that you're looking for? Traffic integrated, toll separated. So you're looking at that. You've taken away the top corners of each of them. Then you end up maintenance integrated, toll separated. So you've taken out you've kept only the toll integrated stuff. The left-hand side column goes away. You're left with only these two. And then you end up separating periodic traffic, and you're left with only these two concessions. And then if you want to take out project revenue integrated, you're left with only one. So you've moved from a set of principles that you structured and helping you select a specific implementation mechanism. This is practice. How do you choose a kind of contract starting from first principles? Right? So I'll come back to this in a second. So let me spend a little time. What is the LPVR concession? It's called a least present value of revenue. So how does that work? What is the bid parameter? Usually when you're looking at something, what will this person, the contractor who is bidding, actually bid on? Right? In some cases, the contractor bids on how much toll he is going to collect. That's a toll contract. The lower the toll, you give it to the guy. Right? There used to be something called a capital grant in the system. So the toll was set by the government, and depending on the traffic that was going to come through, the private sector partner was supposed to bid as to how much capital grant, how much money was he willing to give the government, or how much money was he expecting the government to give him. It's possible, both ways. Because if it is expensive and the tolls don't cover it, then the government will have to pay somebody to pick up the money. That's one way of looking at it. So those were called capital grant models. So whoever gave you the least capital grant, or the most positive capital grant, or the least negative capital grant, they are the guys who got that particular contract. So there are different ways of awarding contracts. In this case, the least present value of revenue means I come up with a number, say 500 crores. And there is a discount rate, which means 500 crores, 100 crores tomorrow is equal to, let's say, 90 crores today. So from discounting at 10%. So 80 crores in the third year is equal to 100 crores in the third year is equal to 80 crores this year. So I'm adding up the present value of a revenue stream. And I keep adding until such time as I manage to get 500 crores. So there was no discounting, you're just simply adding up whatever money is coming on the tolls, and the moment it hits 500 crores, the concession ends. What does this do? It is basically makes the thing dependent on traffic. But if, let us say, traffic is bad this year, it means the thing will last for a longer time. So instead of it being a 10-year concession, it might end up being a 12-year concession. It's automatically extended. If traffic grows too quickly, then it's automatically shortened, which is what you want, because if traffic is growing too quickly, you want to take the road back and expand it. So you have a situation where the term of the concession becomes flexible depending on how the structure works. So that's now what we call a shadow LPBR concession is you don't have to physically collect the toll. You're counting how many vehicles are going through, and the government is basically paying you based on that. The government might collect the toll structure because it then can help the government change the prices. The government wants to encourage, tomorrow it says, electric vehicles will not have to pay toll. If you are running it without the shadow story, without an actual toll basis, what that would mean is the fellow who is running the road is going to get less money. How are you going to make it up to that person? On the other hand, if you're running a shadow toll, it doesn't matter. Whatever you're collecting. I am going to pay you 10 rupees per car going through regardless of what that structure is. So that's how the shadow tolling happens. So you get to a situation where we basically said that if you look at the various risks, these are the various types of risk. Are you going to be able to collect the tolls? Traffic is too much or too little, revenue is too much or too little, maintenance cost is too high or too little, construction cost becomes too high, etc., etc. And finally, remember I said you have to worry about checking whether everybody is using the right amount of structures, etc. or not. Here, what we end up saying is this yellow highlighted stuff transfers these risks to the government, to the private sector, but not these risks. That's the way we structured that particular structure. Actually, what happened in practice was first the NHI used normal tolling contracts, then they moved to something called an annuity, which means the government was paying a certain amount flat every time. And then you ended up in what we call now a hybrid annuity. So over here, what happens? If I'm going to be here during the entire period of construction, they get no payments. And then they get a fixed payment over the course of the, let's say, 15-year period, this entire area. 3 years is construction, another 15 years, this whole 18-year period, they get paid every 6 months a certain amount of money. How is the person going to make money? How is he going to, where is he going to get the money for building the road? No, the government only starts paying only after the road is built.
No, credit.
Loan, somebody will have to pay, right? It's a pretty big risk, because if something happens during construction, the cost goes up, etc., then the fellow is going to have a hard time paying it back. So the rates of interest end up being high. The cost of the project goes up because the person has to pay a high interest rate when you're doing this. But this is a big stake. If you are not maintaining the road properly, you won't get paid, which means you then get really hit hard. You lose a lot of money. So how do you stop that? How do you limit that? You basically ended up, the government gives you some amount beforehand. So let's say the total amount road costs is 200 crores, the government gives you 100 crores. The remaining 100 comes in this way. You still have a strong incentive to build a good road, because then you'll save on maintenance payments and you'll get paid out a certain amount. Not so much. The big penalty, this is a big enough penalty. The other advantage of this is this, which is why when we proposed this way back in 2005, I think, what we ended up, or maybe even earlier, if you're doing it that way, then places like the World Bank and the ADB and others can't lend, because they are like, they lend to the government. The World Bank gives the government money, the government then spends it on something. In a standard road project, they borrow from the bank, they pay the contractor. Here it doesn't have to pay the contractor. You're paying the contractor over a 15-year period. The World Bank doesn't give you money every 6 months for a 15-year period. It doesn't work like that. This allows you to then do that. It allows you to borrow from the agencies like the World Bank. Pay this amount, not the borrow less. And this one is being financed from the domestic banking system, because the private sector is borrowing and putting it. So that's how these different structures end up with different kinds of financing models. This particular hybrid annuity model now is used extensively by both the National Mission for Clean Ganga to build sewage treatment plants and for the NHAI to build hybrids.
In case of NHAI, the money is going to get back to the contractor or to the government, because the transport, all of the transport is going to move through those routes.
Right?
But in case of Mission Ganga that you mentioned right now, how is it going to get some revenue back, or I mean, what is the channel to?
Sometimes there is, because industries have to pay for their sewage, effluent, etc. Right? Sometimes it isn't, because the government is, what you're doing, you're paying property taxes. That is a source of revenue. And therefore, how do the police get paid? You don't say police get paid, you collect the fines, and that's, the salary will come from the fines, right? So you come to something else, how that structure comes. So, before we move next, what's the sense that you're getting about this whole contracting? Whenever you move from the standard way of let's buy some cement, let's buy some stones, let's buy some iron, let's buy some earth and build a road. Or let's buy some buses, let's hire some conductors and run a service. That is what it used to be. But now the government doesn't like doing it that way. It's too complicated, too many people. And government service comes with a lot of quote unquote benefits. Everybody has to get a pension. People living too long. Previously, if you died when you were 62, then you retired at 58, you died in 62, 4 years of pension, government was. Now, retiring at 62, you're going on to live till 82, the government has to pay out 20 years of pension, it's a lot of money. I don't want to go to that. But you have to raise your taxes, not teach enough taxes. So there we have it. So this is one way of solving the problem. But if you want to solve the problem, you need to understand how contracts affect behavior and what are you trying to get through a contract. If you, let us say you wanted to hand over traffic list, what would happen? If the road operator was going to get its revenue from just collecting tolls. In this case, with an LPDR, its total revenue is assured. With a hybrid annuity, the total revenue is assured. If the total revenue depended on traffic, what would happen? He's taking risk. Whenever somebody takes risk, they have to be compensated. So if somebody says, I'll build a road for 500 crores, if I'm going to get that 500 crore back by charging cars, then I'll say I'm going to build it for 600. It is possible that I might get only 400 crores. So if I'm working on multiple roads, and some I will get my forecast wrong, I'll have a bad year, and my revenues will go down. Hopefully on some of the roads it will go up. So I'm going to match my structures in that fashion. So fundamentally, that's the cost of road, you end up paying for somebody else to bear the cost of traffic. So these kinds of structures, when you want to move in, does it make sense to transfer the traffic structures, which is why we looked at why do you want to, yes, this was central to the whole issue of, so look through your stuff and you have it and you can come back to that structure later. So now let's look at the urban story. The first thing is, I should change this font. Anyway, never mind. So what the first thing that you hear is what cities growing. Indian cities are growing uncontrollably, unmanageable, all over the place. How do you test that? Is it really happening? Is it not happening? So if cities are sprawling, what do you expect to happen?
Congestion on the road is one, then electricity consumption.
But if it's sprawling, why should they become, because people are coming in from all over? Because
Electricity consumption.
Resource constraint.
resource constraint would happen. Why? That's just more people. So you must, what is the difference between a sprawl and growth? If it is sprawling, let's say something went up from, currently there are, let's say, 50 people in this room. If you put in 20 more people and accommodate in the same space, is that sprawling? The difference between densification and sprawling. this boundary remains the same. More people have come into it. You might have congestion, different problem. Right? But sprawling is, you don't have so many chairs, people are going to end up outside somewhere in the lobby. And then you expect, what do you expect? If I've taken that entire expanded area and I calculate what is called density, which means how many people per area. You expect that to go up or go down if it is sprawling?
Even if it is sprawling, it is going up. If the number of people increase
Yes.
much more than the area that is.
Sure. So the question is, but then that is in some sense growth. So if essentially, let's say you've put in 100 people here, right? Every seat is filled, and then you have another room where you have to organize it because you've had somebody come and give a big lecture. Is that sprawl or is that growth?
That is growth. That is growth.
Right? So, and in that particular case, given that the structure is there, you would expect your density to might rise because more people have come into place. And areas might also grow up. So just those two structures coming through, right? But if it's actually sprawl, you would expect densities to, because it's not organized. Lots of people in one place, few people in some other place, unmanaged. If you were able to control growth and manage it and do it in a planned manner, then your people would stay within certain boxes. So here you're going to around and getting people everywhere. What you actually see from the data for different types of, so these are like really large cities, 500,000 to 1 million, 100,000 to 50 million is less than whatever. These are really small ones here. This is the original density in 2001. This is the city in 2011. Almost across the board, you see an increase in density. People are getting packed tighter, so there may be congestion, possibly, but, and then you have this standard deviation, which basically is, this is just the mean across different cities, right? And here you have structures that are going together. Standard deviations are relatively stable, right? So if you're looking at a distribution, to the extent that you guys have done any of these, fundamentally it means that you have something that is looks the same, right? And just shifted around a bit. So it's something that roughly the total number of cities, the amount was between, in this particular case, let's say, they were between, before it was between 8,000 and 10,000, and now it is between 10,000 and 12,000. So it's a same tight band, but it's moving. If it was sprawling, I would expect the 8 to go down to 6, and the band also to increase. So, there is a specific visual story about sprawl, but if you run the nuts, so this is all about how you have to define a concept of what is sprawl. You may or may not agree. I just told you that this is one where you're looking at density going down, etc., etc. But the idea is you define what you want to do, and then you go to the data and see whether that is actually the case. And that's the thrust of that particular story. Right, so now let's look at, I'll take like 4 disciplines. According to the geographers, they think of, now Samudra might contest it because he is one. So you're looking at density, which I just talked about, as being a clear characteristic of urban. Urban areas are supposed to be dense as compared to village areas. Right? So if we define urban by density, is that growing or not growing? Is the areas of India which are dense, is that more or less? And that's how we end up either density or built up areas. And what we find is you end up, these are two scholars, French scholars who worked on this particular exercise, and they actually looked to see what happened with built up areas across the country. How many people stayed in compact built up areas? And what they found is in a place like Bihar, where people said only 10% was urban, you ended up with a lot of compact areas where a lot of people were staying. So do you call them big, dense villages, or do you call them urban areas?
In between towns is what I would prefer.
In between is always, we might come to in between down the line, but urban areas can be towns, they can be small towns, they can be large metropolises, right? So fundamentally, from a geographer's point of view, this is one way of thinking about it. If you have lots of people living in built-up areas, densely populated, according to them, that legally one country can call something a town, other country can call something not a town. This is one way of empirically common across the world. And that's exactly what the eGeopolis project was. They used a common definition across the entire world to figure out what exactly is going on. So this is one way of thinking. So, and this ends up with two different types of urbanization that you have come through. So the left-hand side is the official number, and the right-hand side is the number if you use the other definition. So depending on how you want to define urban, why is this important? Because if you want to provide some kinds of services, sewerage being one of them, for example, you have to look at thinking how you get services in these areas rather than those areas. Here, you don't worry too much about it, it'll still take some time. Here they're saying, it's already happening, we need to plan. So what are you going to be planning for then becomes important. Right? So now comes another way of looking at it. So this is the whole story around Ambedkar and structure, where you expect city people to have different social values than villages. Right? But is that true? So what they find is even in, and this is all around NCR. This was a survey of about 3,000 households done in different parts of NCR. And here, there are two questions. One is, are you going to invite somebody from a particular community into your house for a meal? You could say maybe if I ask this in the rural area, that number would be 80-20. Over here, it's 57-43. That's still better than 80-20. It's more, it's moving in some direction. Here you still have pretty large majority who's saying yes, the other ones are saying no. Right? So there's still a fairly large residue or remaining population who think in a particular way. Meals are fine. Now the next question is hard. Right? Different types of marriages across jatis, across social classes, religions and language. And this is based on, these are richer families, those are poorer families. And what percentage, yes, as you become richer, you're more likely to agree that it's okay to marry somebody from outside the religion, outside the caste, somebody who speaks a different language, etc. But look at this number. It's 2% for the poorest, it's 5% for the richest. So for most people, this is still definitely not a problem. So in what sense are you urban? So as a sociologist, do you consider these people to be urban people or not? For the geographer, they said, yeah, definitely urban, they all live close together, big built-up areas, etc. Urban. The sociologist says it doesn't matter if he lives in all these apartment buildings and people, all these people outside in Taj Singh Hotel having dinner, you ask them these questions, they all come up with 10%, not urban. So depending on how you structure the issue, you end up with different kinds of solutions. Look at, this is the other way around. On marriage, since we have pulled it together, if you look at what happened with the respondents of the parent, how do you think about it yourself, and what do you expect your children to do, right? So, blue is arranged by the parent. Red is, I decided, but my parents sort of signed off on it. And gray is what I decided to take. Right? So if you look from there to here, there isn't that much change between what happened in your parents' generation and what's happening in your generation. You are, however, expecting your kids to be very different. It's quite possible that that's what you think, but eventually the kids end up might looking exactly like this. I don't know, right? So even through, as you can put some of that stuff, but even for that, 2/3 of the respondents think that the child needs the parents' approval. There's only 10% to say that's fine, they can go ahead and figure out who they want to marry themselves in their life. Now if you do this with, let us say, quote standard Western stories of these kinds of structures, in most cases, this is a large part of the story. They don't really have a big part of desire to put it. Again, sort of moving that structure in. These are two former colleagues of mine who put this stuff together. So you're looking at cities. Are cities more politically active or less politically active? Among structures, you expect cities to be more politically active, but you're engaging with each other, close together, structures, etc. As it turns out, in terms of the grey numbers are the panchayat elections and the municipal elections. And you see that there is, in this particular case, now these are big aggregates. Right? So they looked at Hyderabad and they looked at differing areas of Hyderabad and saw how much they voted for the assembly election, which is somebody else, and this is for their own local election. And they find out that for the local election, many fewer people voted than for the assembly. Part of the reason is that in India, the local guys can't do very much apart from clean up the trash, etc. So there are issues in that space. But that's one way of addressing that kind of problem. So even if you're looking from a political perspective of the urban being more politically engaged, not really. And then finally, so you have, and part of the reason for this, as I said, is because you don't have that much happening in the rural urban areas as compared to the big city areas. So other countries where let's say half of that structure is
In India, 51%, 3%. Go back to the last slide, sir, the spending
Sure.
slide. We are discussing about the Chinese and Indian cities and the engines with the drivers. So this is one testament of that. 51% of China's city expenditure comes from the local government. It's only 3% in India. So what is happening? Local people are the decision makers. How money can be generated, spent. Here we don't have anything. It's tremendous. And this translates to all sorts of
but
things.
there they don't vote anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So, right? So you have a, no, so these are, let me zip across. This is what we are talking about, was these are so there's something called in India called a census town. A census town in India is an area which has a population of about 5,000 or more, a village which has a population of 5,000 or more. It is a density of, it satisfies the three conditions: a density of 400 per square kilometer or more, a population of 5,000 or more, and at least 3/4 of the male working force must not be working in agricultural activity. That's a census. This tells you what percentage of the growth in the urban population between 2001 and 2011 happened because of census towns. Census towns is basically a reclassification. So if we think growth is happening, and this is in Kerala, huge amount of urban population grew, but all of that was in areas which were essentially rural administered areas. Same in Bengal. So large chunks of the so-called urban growth is basically growth that is happening in areas which are villages, administratively speaking. They're run by panchayats. So the question then we ask ourselves in a variety of structural ways is, to what extent, therefore, do these spaces give you an economic function? Why do economists like cities? We think that lots of people close together, all of you guys sitting, which you guys are not doing now, is you'll talk a lot to each other, you'll exchange ideas, new things will happen, and that will create new ideas and that will drive growth. That's the fundamental economic function of a city, to generate ideas. And if you throw people together, it's more likely that more ideas will come. That's the long story short, right? You come from different languages, don't speak to each other, no ideas. Come from different castes, you don't speak to each other, no ideas. Come from different religions, you don't speak to each other, no ideas. So just because you are huddled together, if you have those sociological things that we just spoke about, those ideas will not come. So that's where we sort of bring in this whole story of, so economist looks at it, all these guys think together, why is there no ideas coming in place? A sociologist says, look, how are you supposed to work? Why do you think ideas will come? They have this conversation. They say, well, they're not talking to each other because they are from different classes. Economists don't know that. Hopefully, depending on where you learn something about class, but maybe in many places he hasn't. So that's where some of these issues then sort of start coming into play, as you can put it place. And then, are we running the, I'm sure we are running the PPT version, right? Not the PDF version.
So there are only
Yes.
PDF you sent.
No, I think no. It was running of the anyway. So
Yeah, so whatever you given in that.
yes,
Yes.
it had both of them, and for some reason, my mistake. I should have specified. So you basically have a situation where it's very hard actually, in terms of policy, try and make it happen. But if you don't know the channels through which you're expecting it to happen, you'll keep continuing to try and make it happen. Right? And that's where the theory story matters. Dense cities generate lots of ideas. Here are 5 dense cities which are generating a lot of ideas, a lot of growth. We should get our cities denser, we should have tall buildings, we should have building codes which make things tighter, better, etc. If you're just transferring good practice or what you think is good practice from one place to another place without understanding what is the underlying theoretical channel that is leading to that idea story, stuff may not work and you won't even know why it is wrong. So what theory does is try and help make sense of what you expect, why are you expecting it, and therefore if it doesn't happen, then what might not, what channel might be blocked. Look out and start trying to find out why is something not happening, because you're expecting something to happen. That expectation of something to happen, why do you expect something to happen, is when you lean upon theory. So these are various kinds of structures in place of this. They have spoken for a long time, so it's important that, broadly speaking, the law stuff he knows, all the contract stuff he'll have to figure out. Every time he's writing a contract, now he'll think, why am I writing this contract? What am I trying to achieve through this contract? Who is bearing, what am I, if I'm telling this person, you shouldn't do this, but the rest of the contract says if he does it and nobody notices, then he's going to make a lot of money. So let's try and figure out how that payment structure is, etc. I'll tell you a very funny story on the psychology front. Maybe I won't. It is some point later. Not sure.
So even the role of theory
Yes.
in development practice.
Yes.
Though I mean we very much understood by your presentation that every school of thought would be different. The economical thought would be
Mhm.
different from the sociological thought. But they are also overlapping in some way or the other, right?
Hmm.
For example, if we want to look at how Kerala and West Bengal saw growth in the rural areas,
Mm-hmm.
just by increasing, so I mean that has to do, I mean you yourself mentioned that we cannot copy paste one model to some other place, right?
Mhm.
So everything needs to be considered.
So, for example, West Bengal, one of the big things, one of the big questions, the practice one, should we declare, there is the role of the state. The state decides which areas are to be declared as urban, and therefore they are governed by a urban local body or a panchayat, right? So the question is, you're asked to advise the state. All these census towns, they're dense places, people there are not doing agriculture. Should we make them towns? That is the question, right? Currently they are villages. The census is calling them urban. So why do you continue to call them villages? Make them towns.
So the third tier of government that was brought in, I mean, it was not there in the British era.
Why?
The
What do you
third
think? I mean, you'll have municipalities. My colleague Pushpa Pathak is researching. Her site was Dhampur, which is why sugar mills, they often see Dhampur sugar. So she did a PhD 40 years ago on that town, and has now gone back after 40 years to see what difference it has made. But that town's local body, business local bodies, are all over 150 years old.
Sir, it was at certain places it might be there, but
Mhm.
it was not a very regular practice by the
अभी भी नहीं है, सिर्फ 8,000 है,
हाँ, sir,
सिर्फ 4,000 है.
So the third tier has to come in. I mean, it is not that we have to make everything urban.
So third tier is, the panchayat is a third tier or not a third tier?
It is a third tier. Even municipalities, for that matter of fact, are third tier.
So when you say third tier has to come in,
Has to come in more effectively. Like you yourself said that the local administration only takes decisions for
in urban areas, it takes decisions for picking up garbage.
right, sanitation.
In rural areas, it is running Narega, it is doing a variety of schemes, right? In rural areas, it is quite possible that the local government is much more empowered and has a lot more responsibility than urban areas, given the way we are functioning today. Right? So in that, that's a political science story. Right? Who is public administration story. So if I'm looking purely at the basis of these three criteria that the census has done, population, population density and economic activity. These are only three criteria that you say it is an urban place, तो बना दो urban इसको. But if you make it urban, will the local control go up or go down? And the public administration guy and say, ki, bhai, if you make it urban, right now this panchayat can do many things in this place because it is a panchayat.
Right.
The moment it becomes an urban local body, let's say Nagar Panchayat,
Right. Control would be much minimal. Right.
so is it good for the people here? And which is why in Tamil Nadu, there is a big case with about 500 such villages were turned into towns. And then the people protested. And they were turned back into villages. Right? So, whether you are trying to achieve something, again, you have to try and ask yourself, what is the objective? Like in the first one, I want my buses to run safely and reach from point A to point. Second one, I need my roads to be built cheaper and be well maintained. What is here that you are trying to achieve? If I am trying to achieve a kind of service provision to people, maybe it's better to keep them in rural areas. Maybe not, we don't know, right? But that question flows from that principle, and then you bring in whatever theory makes sense. This is why the census has called it a town, therefore we should make it a town. If you ask yourself, not the census town definition is based on 3 economic concepts. There will be some geography concepts of density, etc. Is that the only basis that we should rely upon, or should we take in other factors like political science, sociology, etc.? Politicians know this instinctively. They're not doing all this sociology, political science, etc., but they have a sense of the ground because they're engaged. So लोगों को पसंद नहीं है. They're getting upset if I try to turn it into town. So let's hold on. They may not be able to articulate why they're doing it. As far as your discipline is concerned, part of your training is helping you help people understand why they think the way they are thinking. The politician comes back and tells you, yes, I was thinking the same thing, but I was not able to fully express why I was thinking like that. Now you have made it clearer for me as to why this I was thinking like that. That is the kind of engagement, hopefully, as you grow. The same thing, you'll have engaged with a whole bunch of people who are local leaders, structures as part of your NGOs. And I think there's a lot of local knowledge. The question is whether that knowledge is something that is codified and structured. Is there another class here? But I don't want to pull people up in places. Otherwise, anybody who thinks they're here or other.
So more or less the migration happens. I mean, if we take, if we consider the area of NCR, then the major reason of migration is for
all
the
big cities in this country, the rate of growth is less than that of smaller cities. It's not easy to migrate to Delhi. It takes a lot of money to live in this city.
But in the last 15 years, NCR has in itself expanded to much more larger areas. I mean, earlier
Administratively called areas NCR.
Right.
अलवर को NCR बना दिया. अलवर didn't have to do anything.
Right.
अलवर तो बैठा ही जहाँ पे था वहीं पे है. Right?
Right.
कुछ साल पहले NCR में नहीं था, अब NCR में है.
It is not
NCR बढ़ गई है.
serve any purpose.
There is a, so I was asking her, she comes from Ghaziabad, as to, there is now this new railway line to Meerut. Right? Without the NCR, that railway line to Meerut may have happened later. It may have become easier for the railway line to Meerut to be built or justified. I still don't know whether it's a good idea. Because now that you have a really fast rail line to Meerut, what is the idea? You guys are in Sonipat. So is it that all future development is now supposed to take place around Sonipat? Should Jindal now sort of move from Sonipat and build a campus near Meerut? Because that's a much faster way of coming in and out. You don't have that kind of connectivity to Sonipat, but then they're building, I'm told, your metro line to Sonipat or something. Right? So what exactly is going on here? So are you providing, Meerut has two large expressways. There's an expressway, it has the S24, now it has the RRTS. So you've provided it a lot of connectivity. So are you expecting it to become like a corridor between, I don't know, Bombay all the way up to Dahisar, etc., one long conurbation? Is that because, remember, Bombay is a long city, right? Delhi is a circular city. It can grow in all directions. But are you trying to, this whole sprawl business, are you trying to stop it from growing in all directions and telling people, look, if you live here, you buy property, build houses on this corridor, you'll be able to come to Delhi fast, go back home fast because there's structure, and hopefully as a result of that, people will start living around the corridor. Is that what you're trying to do? There, the theory is about why are people choosing to live where they are living? Reduce commuting cost, are they minimizing commuting cost? One economic story. Based on that, I have therefore made a development intervention. I've put in some transport infrastructure. Is that the way I'm thinking? I don't know. Because when they're making these kinds of decisions, I'm also building the Kundli, Manesar, Palwal kind of highways. So I can also, that entire expanse is also there now. So not as if I'm tightening, I'm doing this and I'm doing this. But then why bother? So if I move it from a theory point, is it too many people are coming into this area? Actually they're not, that's the other problem. Therefore we need to do everything. ये भी करना है, वो भी करना है, सब करना है, because otherwise how else will I contain all these people coming here? So you need to, that's the kind of debate and structure. Does it make sense to do all these things? Why are you doing this? Why are you building your highways? Why are you building the RRTs? What do you expect to achieve by building a high-speed rail between Mumbai and Ahmedabad? That's the kind of questioning you are essentially trying to ask yourself.
Sir, with your rich experience in policy formulation, apart from certain issues like we saw in the bus story, wherein there were certain problems which we wanted to get rid of by framing a policy and bringing a new policy. Also, because the court had taken suo motu cognizance, there was pressure on the government, they had to do something. Apart from that, when a policy is being framed, which theory, I mean, as per me, as per my understanding, limited understanding with this presentation as well, I mean, it should be the economic point of view or the theory that would drive it more or less, or I mean, how does it go about?
Economists like to think so, right? But obviously, the final decision makers are politicians. So as an economist, I might say everybody should pay for everything. Your tolls have to be there on every road, right? Parking charges have to be there on every street. Then, if I do that, will I get re-elected? May I ask you? The politician says, wait, I don't know. That's one way. Again, let's say, should you have, my favorite story is, should there be tickets on buses? All of you guys, how many of you guys take buses anyway? Last time anybody took a bus? Anybody who took a bus in the last 7 days?
Right, bro.
No buses. Really need to fix the buses. No, I mean, seriously, I've been taking buses the last week and it is a mess. Took one yesterday, took one 2 days ago. Trying to get around using buses, it's not easy. So the point is, but obviously there are a lot of people who are actually taking buses, right? So when I get onto a bus, it's very nice to see that a lot of women get on and they're all being given tickets. Right? Usually, if there's a home guard sitting next to the bus conductor, he's handing out the pink tickets and the conductor is handing out the regular tickets. So, should buses be free for everyone? Would that help? If buses were free, would you ride them? They're already free for all of you. None of you are taking them. Right? So, cost is one thing. The convenience is another. And if I created a bus system where, like the metro, I could change, the bus didn't matter, you stood somewhere, the bus is going, you want to go north towards the university, any bus that is going in that direction, you jump on. Keeps going as long as you're there. Once it stops going somewhere else, you get off and you wait for the next bus to go somewhere else. This is called direction-based routing. And then you have destination-based routing, means I'm going to wait till I get for a bus for the university. Shifting from destination-based to direction-based is big. Destination to direction plus no tickets. Maybe you guys will start riding buses.
What kind of questions will we ask? Like, if we have to.
First question to ask yourself is why don't I ride a bus? There are many reasons, right? I don't ride a bus because I don't feel safe in a bus. Right? That's a different problem to solve. It's a social, I can get lovely connectivity, everything is moving properly, but I don't feel safe, so I won't join the bus. If that's the reason you're not on a bus. So, if I was purely an economist, safety is not something I'm thinking about. In many of these cases, air-conditioned buses, they're free for women. The price of tickets for men is high. So there are fewer men on these air-conditioned buses. So women are apparently feeling safer riding these buses. If tomorrow I make buses free for everybody, then even the AC buses will feel unsafe. Ridership might drop. Right? So, understanding why requires some theoretical construct. Right? Women, whenever there is frequent buses, in Bombay, women are using them all the time. If we make frequent buses here in Delhi, people will use them all the time. No. Why do women use buses in Bombay? Why don't they use them in Delhi? Understanding that requires you have some framework. It could be a psychological framework, it could be a sociological framework, it could be an economic framework. Right? So each of these disciplines you bring into theory. So whenever somebody is teaching theory in a development practice class, it's always important to realize that they're doing it with one should think about and ask about how is this stuff useful in practical way. And oftentimes the many ways in which you can show it them. Right? So these are not abstract concepts that is just helping you train your mind. There are actually ways in which you think. For example, all that stuff I did about incentives is basically a bunch of math that people do. But for a practitioner who understands that stuff, it helps you design a contract that will give you it. Why is it that maintenance and construction need to be integrated? Because if I am going to both build and maintain, I will build it better so I can save on my maintenance costs later. Right? There is an engineering story that the cost of maintenance depends on the initial cost of construction. There is also an economic story. that I will save money tomorrow, therefore I will willing to invest more today, not save money, not use bad materials. Unless I'm thinking through the structure of materials. Yes, the question.
So could we fit the nudge theory of behavioral economics in this context?
Yes, they're using it all the time.
So it's about shaping the choices, not necessarily without.
So you're seeing you use these nudges all over, right? For example, you see nowadays instead of having zebra crossings, you have these 3D. You will see the zebra crossings look like as if they're painted in 3 dimensions, as if there's a bump. And what you're trying to do is when I'm driving, it makes me believe that as if there is a bump in the road, and I slow down. I don't, because I'm going over that crossing, every day or something, and therefore I may not. But maybe it stops somebody from doing it. There is a big sign somewhere saying, everybody in this particular neighborhood recycles. There are people who make recycling trash bins bigger holes, non-recycling trash bins to make it into smaller holes. It's easier to put stuff into recycling bins than non-recycling. There are many ways in which people sort of push in, but then the nudge relies upon understanding why somebody is behaving in a particular fashion. It's then that you can nudge them to move in something. Right? One of the famous cases in England, for example, the painted little kids on storefronts and structures, etc., because they felt that people would be less likely to damage things. So, for example, in Kolkata, you have along walls of various streets, and even elsewhere, these little slabs with God's images on them, right? And the idea is apparently you prevent people from urinating or throwing trash there, etc., because they have these pictures of gods along that side. Maybe it works. So, in many of these cases, when you're doing this, we didn't call it nudge theory. That's what later on Dick and Taylor sort of came up with. But people used it anyway because they thought it would help them. So in that sense, definitely psychology and human psychology is very integral to decision making. It is very integral to how development practice actually is. How do you get people to deliver babies in the hospital instead of home? Right now we're doing it through money. Deliver in the hospital, 6,000 rupees. Deliver it at home, you don't get anything. Is it working? Yes. People are going to deliver in the hospital. But it's also sometimes working against you. The delivery is safe, but the roads are not so good. So the mother is taken to the hospital, the baby is brought out, and the mother is brought back to the hospital, actually sometimes leading to situations where the mother's health is negatively affected rather than positively. So it depends on understanding that whole process. If somebody is doing this purely to get 6,000 rupees rather than thinking about the health of the mother and the child, if the communication is not about that, but just about 6,000, then you also train the mind in a different way. So again, what is it that you want to do? If you're completely technocratic, completely economic, there might be one relationship, or maybe other relationships from the way to be. Yes, we have to stop.
So yeah, because these people have a class from 5:30. They might
We
need
should
a.
stop.
So
We
great.
have more structures, and I'm sure you'll
Yeah.
end up in the ideas of these classes, the way I understand it, is help you think about that what you're doing, learning this stuff from the course, actually is helpful in the real world, which I hope you have some sense of how that's happening.
That's how I think normal development studies course differs from something like this. Like